Hello and welcome. My name is Fredrick Addai. I am a postgraduate associate at the Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative, or ELTI. I am joined today by my colleagues, Gillian Bloomfield, ELTI's Associate Director of Online Programs, and Abby York, ELTI's Programs Administrator. We are delighted to welcome you today to the official launch of our four-part webinar series titled Agroforestry and Carbon, Addressing Climate Change Through Tree-Based Agriculture in Tropical Regions. And it is brought to you in collaboration with the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture. Throughout the 4 weeks of April, we will be sharing the perspectives and ideas of experts and practitioners in agroforestry across the group. Today, we will talk about the theme Agroforestry as a Climate Solution. Next week, April 11th, we will talk about designing agroforestry for carbon sequestration. On April 18, we will discuss connecting agroforestry projects to the carbon market. And on April 25 or 25th, we will open up for a Q&A session with all the speakers to address your burning questions on agroforestry and carbon. Also, each session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel the next day. As I already said, today we will discuss the topic agroforestry as a climate solution, and we are so pleased to be joined by Dr. Florencia Montagnini, Senior Research Scientist at the Yale School of the Environment and a longtime instructor and contributor to ELTI's training and capacity building programs. We also have Dr. Robert Zomer, a Senior Research Scientist at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, and Sarika, a Ph.D. student at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment and a current participant and a 3 Cranes Fellow participating in ELTI's Tropical Forest Landscape Online Certificate Program. We have divided today's session into 4 parts. We will start with a general introduction by Dr. Montagnini, which is expected to take about 10 minutes. We will proceed with our first presentation, which will be followed by a brief Q&A, which is expected to take about 30 minutes. And then we will go ahead with our second presentation, also expected to take about 30 minutes. Our speakers for today have generously recorded their presentations for easy connectivity and broadcast to our audience. We will end up with a 5-minute closing announcement. So to the general introduction, we will begin by introducing Dr. Florencia Montagnini. Dr. Florencia Montagnini has over 30 years of experience in researching and teaching about the sustainability of managed ecosystems in the tropics, such as forests, tree plantations, and agroforestry systems, with a special emphasis on Latin America. She received her doctorate from the University of Georgia and since 1989 has worked as a professor and researcher at the Yale School of Environment, as well as the Tropical Agriculture Research and Higher Education Center, CATIA. She has written 11 books and over 250 scientific articles about the ecology of tropical forests, agroforestry systems, native species reforestation, and forest restoration. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Florencia to give us the general introduction.
All right, many thanks, Fredrick. It will be 12 books in a couple of months with the second edition of another agroforestry book that's coming up soon. So I'm so pleased, welcome everyone. I'm so pleased to presenting today, introducing this webinar. I'm so proud of it. Tropical agroforestry as a climate solution. I'm going to explain to you in a brief period, only 10 minutes, how can agroforestry contribute to be a climate solution. And for motivating you, you see a number of agroforestry systems from around the world, from Africa, a home garden on the left, riparian buffer strip in Colombia, then successional ecosystems in Latin America, a silvopastoral system and a linear system of living fences in Latin America, and a perennial crop, guayusa in Ecuador. Next, please, Fredrick. Next slide, please, Fredrick. Okay, too fast, too fast. Okay, next one, please. No, that one, stay there and do one by one. You need to keep doing one by one. So how can agroforestry be a climate solution? So agroforestry can have functions in adaptation and mitigation of climate change. In adaptation, as we know, agroforestry can improve the microclimates very much. Next, keep going. Microclimate impacts on agroforestry are very important because that's what the plant is seeing. So agroforestry can mitigate the radiation that comes into the plant, lowering air temperature, wind speed, regulating the water that flows down the plant, decreasing evapotranspiration. So all that's very important for the crop. But then not only that, continue please, agroforestry can also protect in general from heavy precipitation, not at the microsite level, but overall. It can also have very important functions in soil and water conservation, soil fertility improvement. That way it can increase the length the system can remain productive. Like it's very well known that for coffee, for example, it can double the time coffee can remain in production. Decreases in pests and weeds, that's very important too. So then you don't need to use all these agrochemicals. Diversification of agricultural systems and income, food sovereignty, then fulfilling some of the Sustainable Development Goals, like Sustainable Development Goal 2, decrease hunger, and biodiversity and other ecosystem services as well. And I don't think we will touch again on adaptation. This webinar will focus very much on carbon sequestration. But mitigation is a very important role of agroforestry, and that can be the two important mitigation functions of agroforestry. Can be carbon sequestration, and we're going to be devoting some time to that, and then decrease greenhouse emissions as well. The next one, please. Yeah, so I think you went too fast. Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. Again, the next one, please. Just skip one. So how do you measure agroforestry carbon in agroforestry? One thing that people sometimes disregard, they tend to concentrate on estimations of above and below ground biomass and carbon, but they ignore sometimes the soil carbon, and very often they also ignore the below ground biomass. So our studies in Costa Rica, which I'm showing here, La Selva Biological Station, where we have spent lots of time, several years, measuring the trees, estimating biomass, and then the next slide, and then running allometric equations from the trees, measuring the trees, the logarithms are there. So once you develop the allometric equation, then you don't need to destroy the trees any longer. So at this point, with research such as ours, there are long lists of allometric equations that have been used or around the world to estimate carbon sequestration for the most frequently species that are used in agroforestry worldwide. The next one. So you have that resource. So studies like that have been done at CATI in Costa Rica for carbon sequestration in annual and perennial crop tree combinations. The next one. keep going with the text. Research from CATI in Costa Rica shows that agroforestry with perennial crops, as you see to the right, coffee, cacao systems in Costa Rica at CATI, they can be very important carbon sinks. But continue with the text. Intensively manage agroforestry with annual crops like alley cropping, as you see also to the right, alley cropping there, that needs pruning and other things, and it contains annual crops. They are much more similar to conventional agriculture in terms of the amount of carbon sequestration. And then an important conclusion for the studies done at CATI and many other parts of the world is that carbon sequestration, even by perennial crop tree combinations, which is the ideal situation, like coffee, cacao, etc., can only sequester about 50% of that in natural forests. You see the natural forest. And most of these studies do consider natural forests as control, as comparisons. The next slide, please. We also measure soils in Costa Rica, the same experiments you see there. That's a long-term experiment at CATI with organic coffee and different species of trees for organic agroforestry in comparison with conventional systems of growing coffee, conventional fertilizers, etc. And we saw that the decrease of chemical and herbicide use, when you decrease the use of agrochemicals in the organic system and you increase the amount of organic inputs, all kinds of organic inputs that you give to the coffee, that corresponds very clearly to an increase in soil carbon, and particularly in the coarse fraction of the soil. And that's very important too, because agroforestry in general, the way agroforestry is managed with all the inputs of organic matter, etc., tends to produce coarser, a much greater amount of coarse fractions in the soil than regular system. That has been shown also in Bahia with the cacao, the cabruca systems in Bahia. It has been published recently. Next slide, please. Yeah, in silvopastoral systems, as you know, silvopastoral systems cover large areas of the agricultural land, but especially in Latin America. And Katie and other collaborators like CPAV in Colombia have done several studies of carbon sequestration in silvopastoral systems, and they have been very comprehensive. They have done studies, as you see in the pictures, of the trees and the soils. And they have found very interesting results where they can see that the pastures with trees, especially when they are very well managed in intensive silvopastoral systems, can sequester amounts of carbon that are, like, again, about half what it is in the natural forest. Next slide. But the other interesting thing that Katy and other collaborators have done is looking at the other aspect of mitigation, which is if you can lower the greenhouse gas emissions. And as you know, cattle has been blamed for a long time for the methane emissions. And as you know, emissions of methane result in much higher caloric values in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And you can see that that's what they have found. Look at that. You need to treat your cattle well, as they say in the song, treat your children well, treat your cattle well. Because if you feed them improved fodders, like you see a comparison, a native or just naturalized pasture without trees, the grams of methane per kilogram of dry matter of fodder that you feed can be 30 to 35. But if you go all the way to an improved pasture with brachiaria, which is a much better grass, then you decrease it some. But then if you do a silvopastoral system with leucaena, lucina, which is one of the best fodders you can find, and it's very much used in intensive silvopastoral systems all over in Latin America and other places, you can decrease it to half. So that's very important. If you feed the cattle well, also if you feed them supplements, the amounts of emissions of methane can decrease by half. And it's so important that the IPCC has paid a lot of attention to it, and they define the fodder digestibility as low, medium, and high. So depending on the type of fodder that you have for your cattle, you know how much methane you are emitting. So that's very important. The emissions can increase in the dry season simply because the grass is lower quality. So that also gives you an idea of how much methane you are emitting. Next slide, please. And then below ground biomass, that's something that most people tend to ignore because it's very difficult, especially the fine roots. So it it's very challenging. It's very hard to find people who really want to dig out the roots and wake them. But there are root to shoot ratios that have been developed through time. We have developed our own root to shoot ratios, and the IPCC defines a root to shoot ratio that you should use of 0.3 to 0.4, meaning that's the proportion of the above ground biomass to the below ground biomass. And the above ground biomass you can estimate now with all kinds of remote sensing imagery and all those tools. So that way you can estimate how much is in the below ground. But we have found that our numbers don't coincide that much with those root to shoot ratios of the IPCC because there is strong variability in root types in tropical trees. On the left slide, you see those roots were extracted from forests in Bangladesh. And then imagine how much smaller the roots are on the right side, some trees from a wetland in Latin America. Next slide, please. So the key messages from all this that I've been telling you about is that as we have seen, several types of agroforestry, especially the ones with perennial crops, have the potential to regain some of the carbon that is lost through the atmosphere with everything that we do, like deforestation, other emissions. But the species, the designs, the rotation ages, the management of the agroforestry system, remember that too, the management where you're pruning all the time or not, they play a large role on the amount of carbon that agroforestry systems can sequester. Monitoring, remember that monitoring must include the above ground, the below ground biomass, and the soils as well. The allometric equations are out there for you, but you need to be careful the ages of the trees and the locations for each species, because there is such an important difference depending on climate, and Robert will tell you about that in a minute. Carbon tools are also very useful. Many institutions like CATIE itself, the Global Environmental Facility, the Rainforest Alliance, the FAO, many have developed their own models to estimate above ground, below ground carbon sequestration, because they are dealing with situations where they want to know how much carbon is there for mitigation goals, but that have to do with carbon credits and all that. So they are quick models that you can use. And they're not very precise, but they are being updated as we speak. You can find them in the internet because you can look at just climate tools, and then they are right there. And you can use it, but depending on each situation. Just concluding then, as a climate solution, although they cannot replace the full amount of carbon in the forest, remember at most it was half of what it is in the forest, agroforestry, on the other hand, has the benefit of providing products and food to local people, contributing to the SDG, especially SDG 2, and providing ecosystem services such as conservation of biodiversity and other. And also, as we saw in the first slide, one of the first slides, agroforestry can play a very important role in adaptation to climate change. Maybe in a few years, we'll only be thinking about adaptation of climate change, how to adapt to everything that's happening that we cannot stop. And then what we haven't talked about, and we should, is who is going to do it? So we are saying we need to plant all these trees to mitigate the carbon emissions, but who is going to do it? So the preferences of the landowners for planting trees in their agricultural land may depend on the technical knowledge on one side. Do they have the knowledge? Is there technical knowledge available at the institutions, NGOs, government that's trying to promote this? Then the availability and the incentives that you are going to give to them, there are all types of incentives like taxes and all kinds of benefits for farmers, but are they available everywhere? And then the perception of the effectiveness that the farmers have on each agroforestry system. Some farmers simply may have a preference for not doing it because they really don't know how good the agroforestry system will be for their situation. So thank you very much, and I will leave you with our next speaker, Robert Zomer. Muchas gracias. Thank you for your attention. And I think, yeah, here I'm introducing, thank you for the clap, 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 and the little hearts that come in the screen. I love them. So Robert is with you. We have met a long time ago. He's very well known around the world. He's been cited how many times? You must have so many citations of your work. He's a senior research scientist in landscape ecology at the Euro-Mediterranean Center of Climate Change at the University of Sassari in Italy. He has graduate students there. He's currently finishing up a presidential fellowship from the Chinese Academy of Sciences. So today he's in Kunming, at in Yunnan, at the Kunming Institute of Botany in Yunnan in China. And he has a background in plant community ecology, forest ecology, agricultural ecology, statistical analysis, GIS, remote sensing, environmental modeling. That's what you are doing now too, you were just saying. Landscape level spatial analysis, that's so important, landscape level. Extensive experience in the Himalayas, East Africa, South America, Southeast and Southeast Asia. And he has also been at the World Agroforestry Center in Kenya, and the International Water Management, International Center for Integrated Mountain Research. And so I'll leave you with Robert, and it's such a pleasure to have you here, Robert, to meet again. We have interacted a lot, but it's such a pleasure to see you again here. All yours.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Florencia. Thank you. It's very much my pleasure to be here. And actually, I feel quite honored to be invited to speak at the Yale School of Forestry Leadership Training Initiative. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I have the recorded presentation. Did you want me to give an introduction or?
No, it's fine. Our team will work on broadcasting the video now. Thanks, Florencia, for the introduction, and thanks for Robert for being with us.
Thank you, everyone. And while I'm getting the slides up, just to share, we pre-recorded the video so we could provide subtitles and help with ease of connectivity. But Dr. Zomer's here and available for a few questions afterwards. And then as you have questions, please type them in the Q&A feature so that we'll try to get them live, and we'll try to get them in typed version, and we can also try to get them resolved after the session as well. Just a second while I get the video up and other things out of the way. Do you see everything, Fred, and everybody? Oops. Sorry, here. Let's try that one more time. Okay. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Zomer. Very happy to have the opportunity to participate here in the Yale Environmental Leadership and Training Initiative. And today, the topic, of course, is tropical agroforestry. And today, I'm going to focus here on tree cover and biomass carbon on agricultural land, asking the question really just how much tree cover is there? How much biomass carbon are we really talking about when we're talking about mitigation potential of agroforestry? And also, of course, some of those other questions about where is it and what is agroforestry and what's the potential for it? So we're talking about agroforestry in tropical regions, but really, actually, what we're really talking about, since the conditions in the world at the moment, particularly the climatic conditions, which are rapidly changing, but everything, there's an entire environmental change that's going on rather rapidly and more rapidly than in the past. So what we're really talking about here is achieving sustainability and pathways towards ecological restoration, and as I say, in a rapidly changing world. So we know all about bioclimatic, shifting of bioclimatic zones, and here's an example from Asia Highlands of what we can expect of the shifting of these bioclimatic zones. And these bioclimatic zones, they correspond to terrestrial ecosystems, agricultural ecosystems, and they have pretty severe implications for food security and socioecologic resilience of small farmers and communities across the tropics. So in addition to all of that, there's a biodiversity crisis that's ongoing. And so this kind of just shows a little bit, of like, on the left-hand side, what we see here is the estimated time of recovery after one of these ecosystems are lost, basically converted to agriculture. And then if you're trying to restore that, and we can see things like tropical peatlands take longer than 200 years, tropical grasslands might recover. But you can see that a lot of these, once we lose these irreplaceable ecosystems, it's very difficult to actually recover. And here on the right-hand side, if we look at exactly where all that carbon is, a lot of it is in tropics. If we look at tropical peatlands, mangroves, tropical moist forests, mini marshes, tropical moist, tropical dry forest, there's a lot of irrecoverable soil organic carbon and irrecoverable biomass carbon that's lost when these are converted to agriculture. So what we're really looking is to take pressure off of these natural ecosystems. Now, mitigation and adaptation are words that you hear a lot these days, and that's basically what our response to climate change is in the most general terms. And so when we talk about mitigation, we're really talking about carbon, sequestering carbon, or mitigating the impact of emissions of that carbon that's increasing all the time. So now the other term here, adaptation, this is our response to the changing bioclimatic conditions that are being that are caused by the increased carbon. And so when we talk about mitigation, people are talking about drawdown. And so one of the main pathways that people really mentioned all the time. You can't hardly write a proposal or talk about climate change mitigation without people mentioning agroforestry. And so one of the questions is what is the potential of that agroforestry and where would that potential be? So one way to look here is like, this is a map that I'm showing. It's carbon and biodiversity. And it has, you can show areas of high carbon, high biodiversity, low carbon, low biodiversity, and some pretty distinct patterns really jump out at you. You can see that the northern hemisphere has quite a bit more of the high carbon, low biodiversity areas. And a lot of that, of course, is soil carbon in boreal forest, wet boreal forests in the northern boreal forest up there. And then the high biodiversity, high carbon areas, we find them across the tropics. That's where they are. And if you look across that band of the intertropical zone there, you can see that Indonesia, Congo Basin, Amazon Basin, that's where we find the high carbon, high biodiversity. But generally, the tropics are higher in biodiversity than some of these northern regions here. So then the question is, so how does agroforestry fit into this whole matrix of challenges that we face here in the 21st century? So somewhere in between adaptation and mitigation, there are many positive benefits that are ascribed to agroforestry and that people talk about. And some of these are listed here. The main ones are increase in diversity, increase in resilience, the option for biodiversity-friendly farming approaches, increased soil organic carbon from the trees and the roots, certainly increased soil biodiversity, and then on to things like the potential for using agroforestry as buffer zones around protected areas or creating connectivity, conservation corridors between protected areas. And then, of course, the very important aspects of adaptation that's associated with that, and which basically food security and livelihood improvement for small farmers, for communities through diversification and improving socio-ecological resilience. So all of these benefits are ascribed to agroforestry, and I won't really go into these. I'm going to kind of assume that these are available when the right agroforestry system is applied in the right set of conditions and in the right place. So now, we started looking into this a bit. I worked for the World Agroforestry Center for some years, many years. And so one of the questions people always ask is, well, how much agroforestry is there actually? Like, if this is such a great system and it's been used traditionally, then how come we don't see more of it? And where is it? So we started on this research in 2008, asking the question, okay, how much agroforestry is there? And many people said there wasn't that much. So the first thing that happens when you ask that question, how much agroforestry is, you have to kind of define, well, what is agroforestry? And so there's really a lot of definitions of agroforestry, and there are problems with actually mapping it. That's a lot more difficult than just mapping agriculture. A lot of smallholder farming systems are very diverse and very difficult to map with remote sensing. And so there was a basic data problem about trying to answer that question. So here's just a little example of all the different possibilities of agroforestry systems in the world. I won't go into it, but basically there's a lot of diversity in systems, but they all fall into that category of having trees within the farming enterprise. So what we did was we came up with a very simple solution. We just said, okay, agroforestry is defined as trees in the agricultural landscape. So within that matrix of farms, if there's a lot of trees along canals, along roads, whatever, those are smallholder farmers that are dependent upon those trees. They use them for firewood, for shade, for fodder. So we added then some information, some data sets about population density, try to understand how people interacted with those trees, and also about the climate, specifically this aridity index. And then we came up with some results here that gave us a little bit of an idea, like how much agricultural land is there under tree cover. And so what we found was really rather surprising. So when we did this in 2008 with the data that we had, we found that 46% of global agricultural land actually had more than 10% tree cover. And the thing about that 10% tree cover, that's used by FAO as a definition for forest. If there's more than 10% tree cover, they're more than 5 meters high and have so much canopy cover. So basically 10% tree cover. So we did this for the whole, like as much as 50% of all agricultural land. Sorry, as much as 8% of all agricultural land had more than 50%. So we found that there was quite a bit of land that had trees within the agricultural matrix. And so when we looked a bit more deeply, we saw, of course, that there's a lot of variation between regions. And you can see here that Central America at the top had really, a very different kind of curve from, for example, Southeast Asia. Sorry, or South Asia, I suppose. So the other one, of course, is that there were biophysical determinants. So we found that aridity had quite an impact on the tree cover, and that's all basically to be expected. You would expect that. But some unexpected things, we're looking at the global pattern of trees and people. And so you would think a lot of people, less trees, but that wasn't necessarily the case, actually. We actually found every combination of tree cover and population. So high tree cover, high population, low tree cover, low population, and everything in between. Still, there were large-scale patterns, specifically between regions. So here, this kind of shows some of these different regions, and this is aridity versus population with the tree cover showing in the colors there. And you can see how different these patterns are from each other. A very different pattern of tree cover plantings within these regions in relation to population and aridity or biophysical. So now, in 2014, we were able to use some improved data that came through, and it also allowed us to do a temporal analysis, a change analysis. And so we updated it, and we revised our figure. We found there's maybe only 40% in 2000 with the new data of trees under 10%. However, what we did find was that almost all of the regions, maybe except for North Africa, I think, increased the amount of land under tree cover that had at least 10%. So actually tree cover has been increasing and was increased substantially between 2000 and 2010. Then in 2016, with all of the emphasis on countries reporting their contribution in the national carbon accounting and having to file those things, we attempted to estimate the above and below ground biomass carbon represented by that tree cover analysis that we did, and looking at the also the change. And so we developed a fairly simple but straightforward methodology here, where we combined our tree cover analysis with data that was available from the biomass carbon map from the CDIAC, which is a government institute, a research institute in the United States associated with the Rocky Mountain Lab, I think. So we stratified the world into 495 global biomass carbon strata that each had data on all the different forest types that were found within that, or land use types found within that strata. And then we used that data then to model biomass estimates for 2000 and 2010 and look at the change. So that's what these maps are on the side. And some of the results from that showed, for, not surprising, Brazil had the greatest amount of biomass in agricultural land. And not only that, but it increased by 14% over that decade. Indonesia increased by 9%. Chile, New Zealand, Ghana, and Bangladesh all increased greater than 20% over that thing. There were 23 countries that declined by more than 1%. 60 countries had less than 10 tons of carbon per hectare. And 26 countries really had a lot, greater than 50 tons of carbon per hectare existing. So that was kind of interesting. If you dig down and you could drill into this, you could get some really much more interesting analysis. So here's looking at South America, of course, and in the south here, you can see, let's see if, yeah, you can see there, here's Argentina, and you can compare that to the trajectory of what's going on in Brazil. Brazil being more tropical, of course, and this being a bit more subtropical. But what happened in this decade in Argentina was a large-scale conversion to soya production and substantial loss of tree cover on farmland as they went into this agro-industrial approach to soya, industrial ag production. And you see a few hot spots of loss up here in Ecuador, Northeast Brazil, bit in Colombia, but you see some major increases here in the interior of Brazil somewhere. So here's a couple more, you can kind of see there's the same kind of issues here. Large losses in Malaysia, but also increases. Much of that is rubber plantations and maybe misclassified. We also see Myanmar, lots of losses up here along the this fertile coast, and increases up here in northern Thailand. And of course, in Yunnan, we see the effects of the tree planting programs that have been going on there. Here, across tropical Africa, we see a real hotspot of biodiversity and tree cover loss. Right here in West Africa, we see a couple of increases. Very difficult to classify here because of the cacao production is easily mistaken for this monocultures, easily mistaken for agroforestry systems. So these are issues with the data. And you can see a lot of large increases in Indonesia on farmland. So now, just most recently, we published this article here, and here, this is just last year, and so, or a couple of years ago, I guess now. But here we asked actually a different question, and we said, well, okay, let's say that people adopt agroforestry. So let's say you can actually achieve a specific amount of tree cover increase on agricultural land. What would that actually mean in terms of mitigation, and how would that play out in the global discussion on the importance of agroforestry and its mitigation potential to offset emissions and draw down carbon? So the question we asked then, how much C will be sequestered, how much carbon sequestered, given a specific increase in tree cover on agricultural land? And we postulated two scenarios. And so the first scenario is then, well, what happens if there's a complete systemic shift to a production system change, basically to agroforestry, where trees are incorporated within the production system as a core component, substantially increasing tree cover. And so we did that analysis, then we compared it with the other analysis, the other scenario, incremental change. Well, what would happen if everybody just changed just a little bit, just added just a bit of tree cover to their existing system? They don't mess with their existing system. They just try to increase it by a small amount. So basically, and this shows some of the results, and we can see there's a lot of potential for increase. South America and in Southeast Asia, West and Central Africa in particular, and also, of course, South Asia, but outside the tropics, North America as well. So the results, the key results from asking that question, and in this paper then, is that even incremental change to existing production systems in agricultural landscape management by just marginally increasing tree cover increased biomass carbon substantially, for example, over 10 years. So if you just increase tree cover 1% per year globally, let's say, for the next 10 years, you can sequester more than 18 petagrams of carbon over that time within those 10 years. And that's, that's pretty minimal right there. But with even that's somewhere, that's for this systemic change. That's just 1% per year. If you do just bring it up to the median of what might be possible within your bioclimatic carbon ecofloristic zone, then over those 10 years, you might get between 4 to 6 petagrams of carbon. So let's put that in perspective. So just to get some context on what that might mean, the above ground losses in carbon due to all tropical land use conversion in the year 2020 amounted to between 0.6 and 1.2 petagrams that year. And all of the net emissions from land use change, and forestry in 2020 between about 1.6 plus or minus 7 petagrams. So just to bring a little reality check to that idea about petagrams, what is a petagram? It's like 1 gigaton, and you can see what that is. That's 1 billion tons right there, 1 billion metric tons. It's equal to the mass of all land animals other than humans in the world, 2 times the mass of all humans in the world, 200 million African elephants, 6 million blue whales, but more importantly, 68 million automobiles driven for 1 year. So when we're talking about 1.83 per year gigatons, then we're talking somewhere at least 100 million automobiles, accounting for 100 million automobiles driven for 1 year. So, and just for more reality check, carbon emissions into the atmosphere each year at the moment are equal to about 22 times the weight of the current population, if you like interesting facts. So to kind of wrap up here, agroforestry is promoted with all of these beneficial aspects: regenerative, resilient, ecological, improved farming systems, soil health, all of this, all of these benefits. Now, right here, this was just in the newspaper today, as I'm giving it. This was in The Guardian today, and it's describing this tree planting project, thousands of farmers in Africa, and the success of their approach, which is basically an agroforestry approach to planting food forests. Now, recently, there's been a lot of very negative publicity about tree planting projects, particularly in terms of carbon and carbon schemes and carbon trading. Many of those have had to do with REDD, which of course is reduced deforestation and degradation, reduced emissions from deforestation and degradation. And so there have been some issues with those programs, but many of them are not really agroforestry programs at all. And so we really need to be a bit discriminating when we read these things and when we know, and kind of like look at what programs are really working and what approaches aren't. And one of the things that seem to have come out from much of the literature and much of my experience is that working with small farmers, agroforestry systems have a great amount of community and livelihood benefits that make them very, very attractive for tropical agricultural systems. And so on that note, then our small addition to that particular finding is that in addition to all of those many benefits of agroforestry system that make them attractive to development agencies, communities, and small farmers, in addition to all that, there's a significant carbon mitigation potential associated with it. And it's probably one of the most cost-effective and potentially successful ways to achieve carbon drawdown while supporting small farmers and community livelihoods. So I'd like to thank you today and I'd like to thank Yale for the opportunity to be able to present this information to you. And I hope it goes into your thinking about what exactly and how exactly we approach the many challenges of our day. Thank you, everyone. I just want to mention, if you're interested in any of this, all of this data and all of the papers that referenced here are available at this website here, hosted by the World Agroforestry Center. Any questions? That's my email address. Wish you all a good day. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, Robert. That was very inspiring, and thanks for taking the time to record your presentation with us. So I'll follow with a few questions from our Q&A. And the question that we have here is, given the variety of agroforestry systems, did your research inform, or can you speak on what kind of agroforestry system has the highest biomass and carbon capture potential? Or is the goal to be increased tree cover, no matter which kind of system?
Good question. Thank you very much. So on the question of what system has the highest biomass, that's I actually don't know how to answer that, but there are the diversity, like we said, the diversity of agroforestry systems is so broad, but the most important thing is to having the right system in the right place, the right trees, the right systems that fit with both the biophysical conditions and the socio-ecological conditions that are there. And then the biomass, well, many times farmers strive for high biomass, but they don't always. A lot of times there are other constraints within the system. They want to keep some sunlight reaching their other crops if they're doing alley cropping. And so management is always an issue, but there's a big diversity between the semi-arid tropics and the humid tropics. Certainly you're going to get the higher biomass in the humid tropics. You have a lot more potential, a lot more species to choose from. But still, I think farmers with local knowledge are actually able to maximize their potential wherever they are with the species that they either know about or can be introduced with technical interventions. So it's really an adaptation issue of like maximizing productivity where you are with either, traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, or new technical interventions that are introduced into the system.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. We'll take one more question and then we'll move on to our next presentation. And also, please be reminded that we will have another Q&A session on the 25th. So all your questions will be addressed on that day. The second question is, what hybrid method would be most effective to monitor carbon uptake and storage in agroforestry systems in the tropics, specifically Kenya?
Well, that question has a lot to do with scale. So I typically work at the landscape scale, and I rely on a lot of remote sensing and other available data sets. And I also use a lot of surrogate measures because I don't measure it on the ground. And we do a lot of validation from people who do. And so if you're working at different scales at on farm or on experimental agricultural stations, you might be working at the plot level or at the field level. And at those other scales, there are really a lot of options available, all the way from like Florence showed, digging up the roots and weighing them. That's really a big one, to very, very sophisticated technical approaches that include canopy cranes and CO2 sensors and eddy transfer equations. All of these things are being done. But however, that question has a much more practical aspect, which is that many people are trying to monitor their growth for carbon trading and certifying their carbon sequestration actual and potential. And so there's a lot of protocols that come under the acronym of MRV, monitoring, MRV, and verification, reporting and verification. Thank you. And those are very specific, and there are several different schemes. There's a gold standard, there's a voluntary carbon market. And so that's something that's much more specific and laid out. If you're involved in that, someone will probably hand you a protocol that you need to work with.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much, Robert. Now we move on to our next presentation, but before that, I'll call on Dr. Montagnini to introduce Sarika.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. That was fascinating, and also your answers to those crucial questions. So many questions that are still around in terms of methods. And, yeah. And there are people who are even like skeptical on certain methods, as you know, very much. Yeah, so then let's move to Sarika. Yeah, what a pleasure to have you here, Sarika. She's a conservationist and climate leader in India. And you know that India is the country in the world that has the largest area in agroforestry. All types of agroforestry are there, maybe not so much silvopastoral systems, but all. And then India is the first country in the world that had their agroforestry legislation. So that's an incredible thing to have agroforestry legislation. So now you're talking. So she's dedicated, Sarika is dedicated to knowledge dissemination and community engagement to inspire collective action towards agroforestry and sustainable management strategies. She's a doctoral student with the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, focusing on socio-ecological frameworks related to invasive species in forest ecosystems. That's such a wonderful topic. She's a current participant of the ELTI Tropical Forest Landscape Online Certificate Program. So we're proud to have her, one of our students participant. And she's a 3 Cairns Climate Fellow at our school. So that's very, very nice. So Sarika, it's all yours.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Florencia. Sarika, please can you unmute and say hi to our audience?
Hello, everyone. I'm thankful to Yale for providing such a nice opportunity. I'm from a very tribal community also. So I have some traditional background related to farmer and some, I'm also facing some knowledge loss in youth, which agriculture related knowledge loss. So while preparing for this presentation, I was very much connected and emotional also. So let's have, let's start with the presentation.
Thanks, Sarika.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarika. I'm PhD student pursuing my PhD from Ashoka Trust from Research in Ecology and Environment from India. Today, I'm presenting on topic branching out, exploring the landscape of agroforestry in India. I'm going to cover following things: current state of agroforestry in India, implication of agroforestry in different sectors, challenges faced by the farmers and forest communities, for future implication and opportunities and case studies. If someone asks you to explain agroforestry to a tribal community, to a farmer, or to a kid, how we will explain it? What is agroforestry? So according to World Agroforestry Center, they define it in a very simpler way in 3 words. That is, agroforestry is agriculture with trees. So agroforestry is an agroecological approach of land use system in journal. It is a practice of land use system, sustainable land use system, which can be classified as fruit trees in combination with crop, fodder trees with crops, fodder trees with pasture or fodder production, trees and grasses with soil conservation, fuels, timber and fodder. Now, if we talk about Indian context, approximately 25 million hectare of the land is dedicated to agroforestry in India. If we talk about what type of farmers are practicing these agroforestry practices, small and marginal farmers during the rain-fed condition are practicing this. Large farmers during the irrigating condition are practicing this. If we talk about in the terms of number, less than 5 million farmers are practicing this agroforestry system. The major crop cultivated in India are the poplar, eucalyptus, dalbergia, neem, acacia, silver oak, teak, and casuarina. The picture shows the Indian map in which India is divided into the 20 agroecological regions. Out of these 20 agroecological regions, two major ecosystems are semi-arid ecosystem, which is shaded by the gray color, and which is the highest, which is the major one, and the sub-arid ecosystem, which is the green one, shaded by the green one, which is the second highest one. The second diagram representing the major ecosystem, agroforestry ecosystem in the India. There are three major agroforestry ecosystem: the agro-silviculture, agro-silvopastoral, and silvopastoral. Out of these, agri-silvicultural is the major one. Farm practices is the rice and wheat practices. Rice farming is the major one. In these major plantation is done for the wind break and for the shade purpose and for soil conservation. Now coming to the implication. First, in terms of economy, three subcategories are coming up: yield, income, and farm practices. In this, several implications both at individual farm level and within the broader agriculture system both have positive impact. Because agroforestry lead to diversification of the income, involve multiple crops including the tree, shrubs, and annual crop. This diversification have positive impact on the farmers' income, as it diversify the income sources and reduce the dependency on the single crop, and their income become more stable over the time. Now coming up to the income, if it reduce the input cost of the as it regulate the microclimatic condition, and it also reduce the fertilizer cost by reducing the fertilizer and pesticide costs also, and it also increasing the income. If we talk about benefit cost ratio, which is 1/4, that is, which shows that every unit of investment made, the return are significant higher. The overall of these income metrics suggest the agroforestry offer attractive income returns and can beneficially reward the farmers. Now coming to the practices, majorly in India, small stakeholder farmers are opting for the agroforestry for their survival, and these large stakeholder farmers are gaining for their going for this agroforestry for their income gain. Major problem in these villages with small stakeholder farmers are lack of education and financial constraint. Because of that, they are going to the large stakeholder farmer for the daily wage worker and leave their farmland as such with the and in these farmland, invasive species or either some other some other unwanted weeds are growing. Now coming to the social impact of the agroforestry. Now if we talk about social implication, agroforestry have profound social implications, like it help in poverty alleviation, community empowerment, It increased the collective action and cooperation among the community members, fostering the social cohesion and empowerment, thus lead to build strong social network and mutual support. It also diversified the livelihood. It also helped in food security and nutritional security within the marginalized community by producing the diverse range of food and fruit products, by improving the dietary diversity and nutritional outcome, thus enhance the health outcome within the villager and marginalized community. As it also improve the gender equity by providing the opportunity to the women. Now, if we come on the women part, gender role. So in rural India, majority of the farm work is divided within the men and the women. So land preparation is done by the men, and seed sowing and crop harvesting is done by the women. So women also have some important role in farm practices. They are not recognized as like the men, and they also not as much paid like the men's are paid. So there are much more research are needed in long-term effect of these agroforestry practices, how these, because of agroforestry, these practices, these women are empowered, and how this is strengthening their leadership and land ownership. So one thing also I noticed in rural India, most of the land ownership is done by the landowner is women only, and which is very surprising because they are recognized as they are the land holders, but majority of the cities, these men's are in the urban areas, men are the land ownership. Now because of this agroforestry, these also strengthening the rural urban linkage by fostering the regional development and thus reducing the urban migration. However, realizing this social benefit require inclusive and participatory approach that prioritize and need and participation of local community and particularly marginalized group. Now, coming up to the environmental impact, if we have like 5 to 6 subcategories. First, that is soil and nutrient. Agroforestry have very good impact on the soil fertility and soil properties. It enhance the soil organic carbon and improve the nutrient cycling. And in terms of water, it also improve the water use efficiency and to reduce the water runoff. And if we talk about energy, it also meets the demand of energy through biomass production. Some of the various tree species are utilized for the energy production. If we talk about carbon sequestration, agroforestry model can also act as carbon sink. It can sequester large amount of carbon in tree and soil. Via this, we can mitigate emission and contribute to climate change mitigation effort. And also, if we talk about biodiversity, in comparison to monoculture system, biodiversity is much more highly supported by these agroforestry models, and it will provide habitat to the various insects, various bird diversity. It will also maintain the germplasm. It will create the green corridor. It will also help in supporting the threatened species also. Now, which are the traditional agroforestry systems which are in the past, which are practiced in the India? These are the shift cultivation, Tangia system, homeshade agroforestry system, multi-purpose tree planting in the agriculture field, Wadi agroforestry systems, and home gardens. Now coming up, which is the major one, agroforestry system, shift cultivation, which is originated in 7,000 years back BC, and which it's have some environmental implications also, which is always in controversial because of their environmental implications. But it's also considered as agroforestry because it involves the intentional cultivation of crop alongside the management of tree and forest resources. But if we talk about Angiya system, it originated in Indo-Burma in 1856, and it's very important, and it's very it's aimed to reforestation. It's demonstrate how the integration of forestry and agriculture can be mutually benefit, leading to environment and conservation and socio-economic development. So here crops are intercropped with the young forest plantation during the initial years of the tree growth, and as the forest tree grow, canopy closures occur. Agriculture activities are gradually phased out from the plantation areas, and so on the reforestation activities are done. Now, if we talk about homestead agroforestry system, these are traditionally in eastern and southern India. It requires self-sustaining organic farming, and in this majority of time, these multiple tree species are raised along with the livestock and the crops. And multi-purpose tree planting in agriculture field, both are practiced in arid and irrigated areas for the different purposes, and majorly utilize the fast growing trees like eucalyptus, silver oak, and teak, and contributing the rural prosperity without significant impact on the crop yield. Now, these traditional practices are not not completely we can use in the modern world, because generational shifts are coming, and because in the earlier times these traditional practices are the necessity driven, and now the majority of agriculture practices are the market driven. And because now changing socio-economic dynamics also changes, and knowledge loss and cultural shift is also there, and climate and weather pattern is also there. But in Indian context, if we talk about what are the challenges for agroforestry in rural India, majority of the villagers, they are not aware about which crop they should, which combination of crop and tree they should prefer for their field, and that crop and tree should also meet the market demand also. And another thing is financial constraint. They don't have much financial stability, so that they can buy good quality of the germplasm for the trees, and seedling for the and sapling for their crop and shrub and trees. And there another thing is lack of political awareness to provide the compensation for destroyed crops, because they don't because of climate change, unpredictable climate change. Majority of time farmers crops are destroyed, either because of drought, either because of flooding, sometimes human wildlife conflict, sometimes some other issues. So they are not getting enough amount of money from their harvested crops. So because of that, they are not interested in agriculture. So majority of people are moving from the village to the urban area for less agriculture intensive laborers. And then another is shortage of superior planting and seedling sampling material, and sometimes people don't know where they can get the superior material. And another thing is lack of market infrastructure at regional level. If they are planting fruit trees and flower or food, they don't have cold storage houses within the at regional level, so that they can store their crops, harvested crop, for the longer time. So because of that, they are lacking behind the money which are getting for their the amount which are getting for the crop. The policy and institutional support for the small landholders. Another thing is for small holders, there is very less policies and very less initiatives also. If we talk about agriculture loans and agriculture banks, and if we talk about water subsidies and summer water pumps. They are not supporting the small landholder peoples, so they are not interested in for the agriculture also. And another thing, lack of interest of the youth in the agriculture. Yeah, the youth is moving to the urban area mostly in search of non-agriculture employment. And this lack of interest among the youth in agriculture can lead to the generational gap in farming knowledge and skill, and potentially hindering the adaptation of the agroforestry among the youngster. And long-term benefit, sometimes people are these farmers are doing farming practices for the short-term gain because of their financial issues, but agroforestry and another agroforestry practices are sometimes giving them revenue in the long term. Then now coming to the harnessing these agroforestry for sustainable development in India. If we talk about carbon sequestration potential, humid region of India offer the highest potential for the carbon sequestration through agroforestry, and especially silvopastoral system. And it's have huge potential. And emission offset strategy we can also use through the 5% increase every year could offset the India projected emission by 2050. And majority of the agroforestry support the sustainable development goal. National goal should be integrated with the somehow integrated with the agroforestry, so that both the schemes, both the development goals should be supported with somehow give a good result will come. And because sustainable development goal are supported by the agroforestry, so somehow we can find some way so that they both can align. Contribution to the climate goal, so scaling up with the agroforestry align with India climate commitment, so we can come up with the more and more agroforestry models, small scale regional models, so that we can contribute to the climate goals. Now what we can do, we can create awareness and capacity building program at regional scale in the regional language via creating the crop calendars within, because people are more confused which crop, which according to the climatic condition, which tree they should prefer. And we can go we can create awareness which financial aid and which scheme they should apply for, and so that they use the maximum benefit of the government scheme within the ecosystem of this rural India, so that they can use these government benefits. In market development and value addition, the main thing is can help these people to develop community storage houses for the grains and cold storage houses for the fruit and vegetable. And we can propose some model for the government also at regional or some district level, so that cold storage houses or community storage houses for the farmers, so that their crops should not be destroyed, or they can't sell them at a low cost. And we can via strengthening the policy framework, infrastructure development, technical assistance and extension services via, and another thing is institutional collaboration via some NGOs. So we should think about for the social and cultural sensitization on the agriculture, sustainable agriculture. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Sarika. That was another very interesting presentation on India. And also thanks for taking the time to present record your presentation with us. We have a few questions for Sarika, and also to our audience. We are still compiling all the questions, and they will be answered on the 25th. So we'll take just 2 questions for Sarika today. The first question is, what is the most useful agroforestry system to implement in a food insecure environment? Sarika, you're on mute. Can you unmute and then?
So yeah, actually, it's a very good question. It's the very similar question which the uh, Robert sir also give the answer, which the most suitable agroforestry system. So yeah, for such like I think for regionally we can go for such systems. What regionally can be suitable? We can make like calendars for that ecosystems, like what suitable crop, what suitable food system at regional level, or traditionally be there, or now what can be suitably there. I like, for me, it will be, I think that is there. And it will be context dependent. It's not key that will be applicable everywhere. It will be regionally, it will be different.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how are products being transported to the market from rural areas? And do you have any findings on adding value to products from agroforestry systems in India?
Yeah, so that is the main thing. So the large landholders usually transport their food systems easily with the transportation. They can afford transport system. But for majority of the small landholders, what they are doing, they have their mediocres. What they gave contracts to these farmers, and they come to this come to these villages, and they see the like farm areas, okay, and then give the rate to the to the crop. And if it, and sometimes it's change also, so what they decided earlier for the crop, and when they see the crop, it's not very good or quality is not very good, while harvesting they change the uh, price of the crop also. So these are the contractor which are coming to the villages, or and get the crop from the village, and they are only taking care of the transport system. So the villages which I visited, so majority of them in the small landholder, they are doing these type of practices.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarika, and thank you, Dr. Zomer, for being with us today and sharing your expertise with our global audience. So, thank you all so much for joining us today. We would like to close out with a few announcements. Admissions for our Tropical Forest Landscape online certificate program is still open. However, it ends tomorrow. So if you are still in the process of applying, we will encourage you to submit your application as soon as possible. And if you have any questions, you can visit our website or email us at tropicalcertificate@yale.edu. You can also visit the events page on our website to subscribe to our mailing list to receive news about all of our upcoming activities. And also to remind you, this section and all other sessions will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. So you can always watch it the next day or anytime that you feel like revisiting our speakers and taking insights from their presentations. Also, next week, that is April 11, we'll be joined by Azaria Kalimba, the operations manager at Carbon Tanzania, Dr. Daniel Piero, Dean of Center for Agroforestry Science at the Universidade Federal do Sal de Bahia in Brazil, and Sico Stortada, head of Agroforestry Hub at the Rabobank in Netherlands, to discuss designing agroforestry projects for carbon sequestration. This is going to be a very interesting discussion, and we hope to see you all next week. Finally, on behalf of the Agroforestry and Carbon Webinar Planning Committee, I would like to extend our utmost gratitude to everyone who joined us today. Please do visit our website or send us an email for more information. Thank you and take care. See you same time next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
it was a pleasure being there. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Robert and Sarika and Florencia.